Hey, folks, welcome to Merrill College. Welcome for what promises to be a wonderful and bittersweet celebration of one of the all time greats, Dr. Ira Chinoy. I'm going to say a few words about Ira in a bit. They will be inadequate because Ira's past contributions to Merrill College are too numerous to list, and his future contributions lie in the legacy he has left, the hundreds of students who will walk this world having had the honor of being taught by Professor Chinoy. But first, I'm going to let Professor of the Practice Tom Rosenstiel, to my left, um, interview Ira. He's going to use some of the techniques he uses in his art of interviewing. So we're gonna find out if Tom is really good at this or not. But even before that, Ira's going to read an excerpt from his book, which he was kind enough to leave a copy for me here, Predicting the Winner, The Untold Story of Election Night 1952 and the Dawn of Computer Forecast. Ira.
Well, I don't normally have very much to say, um, but I'm gonna really. I'm incredibly honored. Well, I don't know if Clint here, Nestor, Katie somewhere roaming around, and Nathan. So I want to thank them for Katie and Nathan. I want to. So my wife Gail is here. She has a really nice scar right across the front of her neck, which you know you might think is from a bar fight, but she had surgery last week. So she talked to you and my daughter Molly Muldoon and my son-in-law Tyler Muldoon. And I was only able to do this book because okay, and of course Rob. So I think what I want to do is I want to start with by reading um, the first page of the book. It's short. And then I want to read you another page, which was just from the acknowledgement section, but tells about how I did the book. Um, and because anyone knows me knows I'm completely reading challenged. I blew it up. Here it is. Because I've had 8 eye surgeries in the last 13 years, and if you see me squinting at you or I don't recognize you in the back of the room, it's not because I forgot who you are. Just I can see you. Okay, so here we go. Nobody saw it in real time. How could they? The history of American elections changed profoundly on the night of November 4. The candidates were at the center of attention, of course, but they were not central this time. We can see its significance now with decades of something never tried before was launched live and untested on national television. Viewers witnessed an outside the box approach predicting the winner from early returns using something new, computers. Like exhibits in a freak show, the computers were referred to as electronic brains and mechanical monsters. That's the way it can be with innovation, considered laughable before they become so locked in that we cannot imagine life before them. This innovation would help fuel an obsession with numbers as a way of understanding and shaping politics. It would also engender controversy right down to our own time. And it would herald a future in which the public square would go digital. Yet on that night, this path was in no way guaranteed or even envisioned. Americans did not yet have computers at home or at work. Most had never seen one. The thinking in broadcast news circles was that the flashing lights of these newfangled gizmos, as they spit out forecasts, might provide an edge. Television news executives hoped to get a jump on the competition, both in calling the election and attracting viewers. But the whole enterprise of reaching outside the box with something so new was an enormous gamble. And it is important to understand, especially in our own time, that this gamble was undertaken in response to a crisis of credibility. This crisis was the fallout from election night forecasts 4 years earlier, that turned out to be upside down. What's more, a lackluster presentation of returns on television in 1948 was at odds with television's promise as a new visual medium for news. What's transpired 4 years later, 1952, is a complex tale of innovation in response to crisis, along with reactions that ranged from enthusiasm to ridicule to outright resistance. The events surrounding that election night, 1952, also offer us a way to think about another more recent inflection point, the vexing event of 2020 and the future of elections in America. That's the opening. And then I wanted to read you I used the acknowledgments section to foreshadow my approach to this book, which is not typical, right? There's a lot in this book that's first person, and so there's the history, but then there's also the tale of how the history was found. The historian Jill Lepore, some of you may know from the New Yorker, and from her wonderful works of history, has written that history is basically written from what can be found, and if you can't find it, then it's not written. And there was a version of this story around for a long time, almost cartoon-like version of the story, and it was wrong in every possible way. And so, but it wasn't, the pieces to do this weren't around to make you feel. So let me read you the beginning of this acknowledgement section, which begins to get at how this was done. And periodically in the book, I step back and explain how this particular thing was found instead of relegating that footnotes that no one will ever look at, unless they're footnote geek, which I'm one, but all right. So the story I have pieced together in this book and in a PhD dissertation that preceded it was not told before because the evidence I needed to tell it lay hidden and took years to assemble. Dozens of people helped me along the way to make the finds and to make sense of them. Mentors, colleagues, historians, librarians, archivists, friends, and family. There were documents tucked away in archives, in personal collections, and in company records. Old television footage and radio recordings were hard to find. Relevant news articles and ads turned up in databases of historical newspapers with search terms that had to be refined by trial and error. The memories of a few living participants of these long ago events provided leads and details, not to mention delightful conversation, once I was able to identify them and track them down. Little of what I needed to tell this story was on the open web, though some important pieces were. A bare bones version of a few parts of this saga had been told and retold before, but these events had not been explored in depth to reveal the surprises, new meanings, and relevance to our time that you will find here. This treasure hunt took me by subway, car, train, and plane to archives and museums in Wisconsin, Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, California, and Washington, D.C. I traveled to Alabama and Pennsylvania for interviews with surviving innovators, to Christie's Auction House in Manhattan, and to see records stored on microfilm at the Library of Congress, in boxes of documents at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, and collections of newsreel footage at the National Archives, and a set of old newsletters at the New York Public Library, and much. I received records sent by archivists in Wyoming, Michigan, Texas, Georgia, Minnesota, and elsewhere. This is also the only exploration of election night 1952 to piece together the television broadcast from CBS and NBC, 13 hours. Okay, over to you. I'm quaking. Yeah. All right, I'm ready.
So one of the things I don't go to war, so don't worry.
Okay. Okay.
So why were the pieces missing? Why were these earlier cartoonists?
So that's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Always compliment the interrogator, I think. They were cartoonish because a lot of times history is told in a rearview mirror, and that's often a mistake. And so from early on, there was a version of this story that CBS used a UNIVAC computer on election night, 1952. True. and it spit out an early prediction that was right, and nobody believed it. Ha ha ha! Man bites dog story. But people along the way just made up sort of, falsehoods crept into that narrative about, oh, CBS held it back. CBS didn't hold it back. The computer makers held it back because they were 100 miles away in Philadelphia. The thing was too big to move to the studio. It weighed 8 tons. And CBS had not sent any journalists to Philadelphia to, for some kind of back and forth. So, that was part of it. Missing until I started this research was that there was a second computer that night. And it wasn't this big, giant computer. It was a little computer called the Monrobot, made by the Monroe Calculating Machine Company. And I discovered it only when I went back to look at contemporary TV criticism. And they're the critic for the New York Times. TV critic was a new job also.
Right.
Jack Gould talked about the Monrobot at NBC. And so that set me off on a path to figure out that piece of it. And there were other pieces too. So it just, this is not one of those things where it's lying around. And if I worked on this off and on for, dare I say, family of mine, off and on for 20 years plus. And so yeah.
Well, it's good to have it done then, for God's sake.
Yeah. Every year someone would catch me in the halls. You done with that thing yet? I say, no, I'm not. So that's part of why it is. And so we have to be, and there is another piece of this where we tend to think about history in the rearview mirror, right? Oh, well, of course, once computers came along, of course they were going to be used.
Mm-hmm.
But that was not, in fact, the case. There was a lot of pushback. And to tell that story that way is a disservice to understanding the process of innovation, fusion of innovations, which is there's as much resistance as embrace, and the story of how this thing comes to be is sort of how the embrace part eventually outweighs the resistance part, and that's the story of innovation. It doesn't all go in a straight line.
So this was part of your this was the focus.
This was the focus.
So 20 years later, as you're writing the book, what's the biggest surprise you didn't?
Yeah. Okay. In all fairness, this is only 10 years.
Oh,
No, no.
I've been fact.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. No. 14 years. Okay. 14 years. There wasn't a ton that was new, but one of the things that happened along the way was the election of 2020. And I had an agent. We were working to get this funny to know about doing books. Publishers don't buy books; they buy proposals. About 130,000 word book, but no, they're not buy that. You need to turn in a proposal. So we did this proposal. We both sort of at the end of the process independently said, yeah, this needs a final chapter on the election. 2020, even though that the book was not meant to be the history of all of that, and also 130,000 words, got to cut it down to 80 or 90. That, I still have scars. That was really hard. So then I threw out my final chapter, which was about innovation, and I tried to sort of think back, what are the lessons of 1952 that could apply now? And when I came up with what they were, I needed to be sure that I really emphasized those at the beginning of the.
So in 1952, as you said, television first tried to cover an election night, and not a great. And television, I mean, most in those rooms, the nightly news, 30-minute nightly news, seemed to dominate American culture. We're 11 years away. They didn't start in. So TV was a fragile thing, and the network news divisions barely
Right.
in 19. They not only introduced computers, they also really introduced network news. What was it that the network did, in your mind, that began to win? They had done the convention, pretty revolutionary. It never really.
So a little bit hard answer, but I think that one thing they did is they didn't rely on the computers. They were there. They promoted the heck out of them. I knew we recorded some heck. They promoted the heck out of them, but they when it came to election night, they were just one part of what you call ways of knowing, right? So they had reporters in the field who began to notice that things were swinging away from what was previous. They had pundits on TV. They had pollsters that they could talk to. They had smart analysts like Edward R. Murrow and Eric Sevareid, and there was transparency in the sense that Charles Collingwood, who was a sort of dashing correspondent who'd been one of the World War II Murrow boys, covering D-Day and such Europe, that when he introduced UNIVAC on election night, he wanted to really make a point that this was not magic. And he said, the computer's doing what we've always done on election night. We look for early trends from places that we already know about, only this thing can just do a lot more of that, do it quickly. So, demystified it was really a big part of that, not magic. So I think that.
And these people were well known. Charles Collingwood and
Absolutely.
They were stars from radio and World
Yeah.
War II.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's go deeper on this.
Okay.
On this idea of what happened. You say that today in the book, you say today journalism needs to borrow ideas from other disciplines, help itself.
Right.
And you say in the book, just as NBC and CBS did tonight in 1992, by turning to the fledgling world of computing, established.
Right.
So, what do you have in mind when you say that journalism?
Right. Right. So we can't imagine how outside the box it in 1950 to bring a computer into a journalist enterprise. This was just, today we go, well, of course, so locked in. But at the time, it was just bizarre. I mean, a lot of people thought it was just bizarre. Some of the serious people like Murrow and Sevareid thought, this thing is on my turf. So one lesson there to me was this idea of reaching outside the box, as you said, right, and collaborating with people who are not journalists, who are from other places. And I've got some students here from the class I taught this spring, and we saw that a lot of innovation along the way in journalism always involved bringing somebody in from a completely different world, whether it was helicopters, Sam is here, did that project, or whatever, radio technicians, whatever it was. So when I thought about it, of course, I had a really scurry to do this final chapter because we sold the book to a publisher and I hadn't written that chapter yet, and we had a date. And you know what that's like. Tom is a serial, publisher. So one of the great things that I did was I reached out right here to brainstorm this, and I read widely, and there's an idea not original with me, but Tom has talked about it, Margaret Sullivan has talked about it, some other people have talked about this idea of what about neuroscience? Could we make an alliance with neuroscience? Could they have some tell us? And I think they can, because I think on election night, going forward from 2020, the problem is not better math. We got great math. That's not the problem. The problem is how are we going to get people who are inclined to not believe the results, no matter what, to find them credible. And a guy named Chris Stirewalt had been part of the Fox election night team, and worked with this entity in Chicago, AP North, which Tom is also involved with, and they nailed it on election night. And they had like the first call that Arizona was going to go for Biden, and of course, the Fox viewers and brass were totally upset with that. Chris Stirewalt got fired, basically, but they were ahead of the game. So, and what he said in his book was that they would have, this audience of theirs would have understood it as reasonable if they hadn't been fed a diet for months and years that led them to believe there was no way Trump could lose the election. So one of the and there are other people along the way. Sarah Longwell is a conservative, like pollster analyst, and she did focus group and wondered why this big lie that Trump had won the election was so persistent. She interviewed a lot of people, and one of the things that she found was that they don't really have anything to point to. It's just a feeling that they have. Oh, and she said it's almost like tribal, right? It's the time they're in the tribe. So it seems to me what we really need to know is why are people willing to be lock themselves inside a bubble of non-fact, and why are they not willing to believe facts that are in front of them? And so I think the neuroscientists could really help with that. And we know that if you're so some of the studies show that your brain on grievance looks a whole lot like your brain on drugs, right? That you click and click and click and you find this thing. Oh yeah, it's like Italian satellites, screwed with the election, and yeah, that's really right, right? So ballots with bamboo, it must come from China. Is that feeds this? You get these dopamine hits, right? And so and everybody gets them from what they do, but so I think really trying to understand that mechanism by which people are willing to believe something just not true is something. If we don't try to get to the bottom of that, I don't think we're going to dig our way out of it.
So, okay, one last question on this. Are you, you know, is are you more optimist or pessimist election night? And a lot depends on a handful of news. Do you think? I mean, one candidate is stoking the idea that he not lose, and if he loses,
Right.
do you think? Are you optimistic? Narrative broken, or are we talking about 30% of people?
I think it's problematic because Trump isn't waiting for the next election. Now he's already
Right.
one of his talking points is already that it's rigged, and they're doing all these things now, which trying to convince people that it's rigged. And if that all you get is a steady diet of it, it's rigged, it's rigged, rigged. Um, it's hard to get out of that. And two of the things that I really took away from my thinking about this last chapter in conversation with Tom and with other people and read widely was that we're not going to fix it with better math. We're not going to fix it on election night 2024. Where are we? 24. But that there are two big problems in journalism. One of them is this generations long decline in trust in journalism and other institutions, by the way. It's not just, it's the courts, it's science, it's academia, and it's been stoked for a really long time it started in the 1950s with this group of people who were trying to save the tobacco industry, just tried to go anti-science, right? So it's a long running. And so I think that decline in trust, we have to figure out how to work our way back from that. And then there are these things called news deserts. News deserts are places where there is little or no local news. And it may come as a shock to you that 70 million Americans live in news deserts, places where counties where there are no local news sources or maybe one and not very good. Counties the size of Rhode Island or Delaware or something like that. Rhode Island, my favorite state. Um, um, so, and another thing that studies show is that of all the different kinds of news, local news is the thing that people trust the most. So if you don't have local news, all this other stuff can kind of creep in. So that's a long way of waffling on the question, but also, um, you know, um, saying that 30 million people is a lot of people. If that's what it turns out to be, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of disruption, and there's a certain, whatever the flakiness percentage of that, people can do real harm. It, it's out there. So I think this needs to be an all hands on deck approach. It's not one news organization can't do it alone. The news industry can't do it alone. It needs to be done by entities that are big enough, have enough, can marshal enough sources. And I'm thinking about NASCAR drivers and musicians and, lots of people in the culture who say, we can't keep doing this. And so I don't know what that looks like. I don't know who organizes that. There's certainly entities, Aspen Institute, there, that could organize something like that, but that's got to happen way upstream of an election. So I'm not overly optimistic about that it's all going to be peace and love in 2024. And we know that there are some states where, the forces of darkness are really organizing to put in place the pieces to cancel out elections. And so I just think, it's a battle. Everyone needs to be engaged. Everyone needs to vote. But I think it has to be this really big. It's that serious. It's like fighting a war. It's
So
like wartime engagement.
One thing neuroscience does is that getting people who are already
Yes.
like NASCAR
Right.
or whomever to vouch for
Right.
is persuasive.
Right. And also some of the studies also show that if you give people information that is sort of contrary to their whatever, there are circumstances under which they can be persuaded. And then the one other thing is that we tend to sort of judge harshly people we don't know. And so a couple of the books that Tom suggested I read, Monica Guzman and Amanda Ripley, places where they've done experiments with getting people to know each other from these worlds. It was, I think, Guzman's book. They, brought people from, a synagogue in New York to the middle of the country and got them to live with people and vice versa. And all of a sudden, they realized these people are not, evil, and I could listen to them. I don't agree with them, but they're not evil.
Yeah.
So I think those kinds of things are important.
So I want to shift gears to talk about your looking back. You might have.
Yeah.
So
If you
a
prompt
lot-
me, I might
A
have
lot
few
of
thoughts.
students and parents wonder if journalism is, hey, you're an historian,
Yeah.
a journalist, an academic, a pioneer in computer reporting, investigative reporter. So why should somebody get a
So I had a student some years back who I really liked. She came into my office to chat with me about her future, and at one point she let go that what she really wanted to do was go into politics, but that her grandfather had said, "Oh, you want to go into politics? There's only one college you need to be in it, at Maryland, in a college of journalism." And I won't say this person's name, but he was like one of the top ranking political figures. I knew it was going to be him, and of someone with whom the college students had some battles with this person, but he said like that's the place. We in my the group of classes that students I had this semester, 4 of the 17 are going to law school. One is going to be a music educator, and the others are going into journalism. But it's a place where you can learn to write, you can learn to think critically, you can actually sort of encounter the world, you can learn to interview, you kind of learn to do these things. And when our students leave here, they know how to be journalists, so they get pretty good jobs when they're leaving. I've ran into some here who've got, fantastic jobs right out of school. So we try to really here at least help them excel. And, I was associate dean for a couple, 2.5, which I wasn't something I aspired to do. There was there was kind of an interregnum. We had a new dean, and very sadly, our beloved associate passed away, and the dean asked if I would do this, and I just promised my wife after finishing my PhD that I was going to lead a more sane life. And I went home, and she said, "I think you have to do it. You got to do it, right?" So one of the things that happened at that time is parents would come in, and they would say, "Oh, it's a really good profession for people, and isn't journalism dying?" And I was like, hold back, don't judge, just hold back. And I said, "Let me ask you a question. Are you reading more or fewer news sources now than you did 5 years ago?" And they said, "Oh, many more." I said, do we really need to talk about this anymore? Is that kind of it? I said, we don't lose our interest in seeking the news, seeking and sharing news. I would love to team up with a genetic scientist and find that gene for information seeking and sharing, because it is part of who we are. And you can think of cultures in the world that have completely shut themselves off, and they're somewhere back about the 10th or 11th century. Development can't do that. So I don't think journalism is dying. I think really big time of upheaval. We know that a lot of local news organizations are dying, but we also have like projects that are underway here and other places to try to reinvigorate, local journalism, and our students having a chance to do it. So I'm an optimist about journalism, but I wouldn't want to own any one news organization, right? I wouldn't want to have all my retirement holdings and stock in one news corp. Thankfully, but yeah, what about you? I mean, we have here, by the way.
I'm asking the question.
No, no, but we have like really the preeminent thinker about the future of journalism here. It was kind of laughable that he's asking me what I think about that. But can I just turn the tables for 1 second? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think you said it. I think that journalism is teaches people
Right.
knowing the world. I think journalism is civic,
Right.
and that if you are not, you cannot, and that if you can write civic literature, that's a spectacular skill that will take you many places and can take you in. My wife's a law professor.
Yeah.
She would love it if her law students knew how to write before they get to law school.
Right.
Okay, enough of. We're going back to my asking.
Okay, all right. Oh, okay.
So, can you remember your first day of teaching?
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Oh, it's pet.
By the way, this is what you in interviewing class get an anecdote, a very specific moment.
I might have to tell you about the third or fourth day.
Okay.
But I do
Whichever
remember.
one you want.
I know. I was petrified. Didn't know a damn thing about teaching. I didn't know anything. My parents were both. I thought it was the last I ever wanted, and all of a sudden here I was walking down the hall to go to class, and we had the associate dean at the time, Chris Callahan, who lured me in. Really pretty amazing. We say he could talk and eat a lot of water. So I'd been at the Post. He sort of, yeah, teach, get a PhD, great. And so I had sat in on one class. That was it. And two of my colleagues at the Washington Post had taught as adjunct the data class. I didn't know anyone who taught. I also taught the introductory news writing. And yeah, I was making. So I remember being kind of petrified about that. And my students were great. And one of the things I discovered along the way is we have like amazing students, and they can, if you bring it to them, they'll sort of humor you, right? And they'll go along. But I do remember the day, it was like my third or fourth day teaching, and I'm driving into work, and I hear this report that a plane has crashed the World Trade Center. And then I think there's another report of the same, and I realize in my brain I'm going, okay, this is like everything has. And I was back in my reporter self going, okay, I wonder where I'm going to end up. Where am I going to end up today? And then in 2 seconds later, I went, oh no, I'm not doing that anymore. And so when I got to the building, I went to my classroom in the old journalism building, which is now it had the colorful name Journalism Building before that. And I was so new, I didn't know how to turn on TV in a classroom. So I had to get someone to come turn it on. And we watched this happen. We watched it happen. I told them they could all go. They didn't need to stay. Everyone stayed. And we were in a room with computer monitors. So I said, why doesn't everybody take a different website and let it be going on? And then towers fell. Somebody had a brother who was a commodities trader and phoned her or whatever and said, talked about Cantor Fitzgerald, this entire commodities trading entity was completely wiped out. We sort of began, I went out and called Gail and said, get in the car, right home, get Molly at school. Molly was 6, I don't know, little, no, all younger than that. And
Chevy Chase helmet.
yeah. And so, and anyway, when I finally got my wits about, nothing prepares you for this anyway. But when I finally got my wits about me, I said, okay, I asked them a question. If you were the editor of the Washington Post, what would you do right now? And I got answers, and these were masters, and they were sharp, and they had done really interesting things in life. And they said things like, I think I'd send somebody down to the Pentagon. Like, that was it, right? Like, they didn't understand that this was an all hands on deck, life-changing moment of the type long, maybe once in a career. So we talked through that, talked through it, and I knew, like you knew, like other people knew, that this would not have come out of the, there's no way this came out of the blue, but I wanted them to sort of come to that. And then we ended up saying, let's keep our eyes out for this, because, probably didn't come out of the blue, and we found out about it. So that was like this crystal clear moment for me that I was at the right place. This is a place where I could actually do something. So yeah.
So we're going to go to audience questions, and which means I'm going to have being able to turn around. We both have artificial discs in our spine, so
I have more.
But
I got 4 fake ones
okay,
in here. You
all
got
right.
2.
We're not doing the organ recital here. But before we go to the audience, I want to ask one other question.
Okay.
What's the most important thing that you have learned about?
Yeah.
Think of your questions while he's thinking of his answer.
Can I say more than one?
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing is, I think that you have to think way before the semester starts. What's something you really want the students to take away from this experience in the classroom? And it's not necessarily what's in the syllabus, right? It's in fact, probably don't spell it out in the syllabus, right? I two students here, and we sort of worked our way up to it. There was no way that I was going to spell that out in the syllabus. So I think that's really important. And before every class, I have notes where I say what I hope the takeaway is going to be from the class, but I don't say what it is. I want them to come to that. So it's important not to spoon feed people everything. That's one. And then another is, it's really important to get to know your students. It's just vitally important to get your students and to understand that people don't all learn in the same way. When I was in the PhD program, Greg Stewart, who was in here, we talked about this, and he gave me a book called Women's Ways of Knowing, and I read it. And one of the themes of that book is that everybody learns differently. And so that's really important to understand. Some people are really good at taking tests. Some people are not. Some people are really good at presentations. Some people are not. Some people can't raise their hand in class. And I have students, I say now at the beginning of the semester, if you're one of those people that can't raise your hand in class, come see me, because we're gonna, that may be your takeaway from the semester, to get comfortable raising your hand, because that's a life skill, and you won't be able to get to college effectively do that. So I will work with them. So I think you've got to figure out what that is. And then maybe there's just one other thing, which was in the first full year of the pandemic, so fall of 2020, I was going to be teaching. I'd always resisted teaching, not in person. And I decided that I needed to. These are high school kids.
Yeah.
They're kids, Got Sam and Sarah here. They were freshmen. They showed up here on their first day as college students, and it was going to have to be online on Zoom. And I was petrified there would be students who wouldn't be able to find their way. Zoom might not have the equipment. So I arranged to do like a one-on-one, 10, 15 minutes with every one of them in the week leading up, one-on-one, the weeks leading up to the semester. And I had 60 that class. It took a little bit of time, but it was totally worth it. And you might think, oh, you did a really great thing for students. Honestly, I was petrified, and I was doing a great thing for myself, because I wanted to demystify this. I wanted to get to know them and sort of break guys. And I think you just have to be able to, figure out what your students look. The students have told me over time that they know when a faculty member is what we call phoning it in. It's just, not really present, going like they know. And they also know when you're not. And they'll cut you a lot of slack if you're not. That's a long answer to the
That's
question.
why we're going to miss this guy, I think. Questions? Yes, Professor.
Uh-oh, I got another interrogator here. I'm in trouble. What's that? I remember. Oh, time. Yeah. Yeah. So upstream of the book, the dissertation. Yeah, well, part of it was panic. I mean, I had to have a dissertation, and also I was here and I didn't want to do what I'd always done, which was not always done, but that I'd done in recent years, data journalism. But as Alice Bonner, who was a faculty member here, said, sometimes you find your dissertation. I kept wondering. I knew that when I was a journalist in the 80s, 90s, there was so much as you were. There was so much resistance to this idea of using a computer in journalism still, and you can't. It's hard to research why something didn't happen. Historians kind of that contingent history that really kind of shy away from. But then I wondered, well, how did it start? And that led me down the path to this topic. And then I knew when I found this that there was this other computer. I got the thing. Nobody else has it. And can I do a little show and tell?
This is your show, and you get to tell.
All right, so I got some show and tell. So the really short version of this is there's a collection of NBC News releases in Hornbeck Library, and I went down, looked at that, and I found this, oh my God, there's like all this stuff about, this little computer on election night, and then it mentioned this Monroe calculating machine company. Oh, and then I put my journalism skills to work. Well, whatever happened to Monroe? So it got bought, sold. They stepped out of the computer market eventually, and they were in a little kind of backwater industrial park in the sort of Delaware, Pennsylvania border area, still selling calculating machines. And I called up I could tell from their website they were kind of interested in their history, but they didn't have this. And I called up the CEO, said, do you have any memory of this thing from 1952? He says, why did it come to the 70s? So I haven't really heard. I don't really know much. But then I said, well, do you have any records for the 1950s? Said to me, quoting you, I've been waiting years for somebody to ask me that question. This is like the thing that stops your heart, right? This is truly like you got to get up and walk around. And he said, yeah, yeah, I know that'll be in the movie, right? So every time this little company got bought, and it was big, it was like everybody owned a Monroe in the 50s. Every time it got bought and sold, he said, I gathered up whatever I could, and there's a room off the factory floor, and they don't actually build these things; they import them and sort of assemble them. And everything we've got a lot of old calculating machines, and I got, dozens of cabinets of files. And I said, well, can I come look at it? He said, yeah, I was there like the next day. I got a hotel room. I was there morning, and we went drawer by drawer by drawer, and we came to, they had an in-house publication called Keynote. There it was, November 1950. Opened it up, right in the middle. It says, Monrobot flashes electric. It was double truck page. It was the names of people, it was photos, who had been there, the inventor, right? All that stuff there. And there was no turning back at this point. Names of people were in agate, and I figured out that the inventor, this guy here, Bill Burkhardt, he had passed away. But I realized that his wife was someone named Dorothy Burkhardt, and when I figured out which Dorothy it was, I realized that she had been the art critic at the San Jose Mercury. And I knew that our dean, Tom Kunkel, had been the #2 editor at San Jose Mercury News. And I said, Tom, do you know that Dorothy Burkhart is the widow of this person who invented this thing I've been talking about nonstop for a really long time? And he goes, I had no idea. What a lovely lady. So I called her up, and when I got that far, she goes, first she said, you must be calling about election night. I said, yeah. Yes, indeed. And then I said, and Tom Kunkel, she says, well, friend of mine. I said, can I come out? She said, yeah, come on out. So I was on a plane, and I spent 3 days there and went through stuff. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, yeah, but okay, yeah.
In other words, it was a sorting hat.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, we'll just go, we'll just go across, yeah.
Yes. I'm going to miss you. You're the person who introduced me to the term goat, which I thought was like, hey guys, hi. Which I thought was, a pejorative until someone explained to me it's greatest of all time. Right. Yeah, no, it's a good term to know. So I'm going to miss the most. Okay, this might sound corny, but I am going to miss the students. Yeah, right? What made you think, that I would say that, right? Because that's the magic. That is the magic here. And that's what I'm going to miss. And, these are relationships that go on for a long time, and they're very special to me. And I mentioned, that 9/11, every year on 9/11, I get an email from a student who was in the class named Michelle, and she was in class that day. And every year on 9/11, she sends to sort of talk about what it meant to her to be for us to be in that sort of safe space at that time, and fills me on what's going on. She got married, she got kids, she moved jobs, a senior digital producer at CNN. But it's, she's reinvented herself. And I remember one year, Molly and Gail and I were in the car. We were maybe going to visit Aunt Judy. I don't remember where we were going. But it was 9/11. I said, I bet I'm going to. Oh, and I did. So I miss these are long-term relationships. I really miss them, and I just miss the magic of class. We just had our last class on Saturday. Yes, oh my God. It was very emotional. It was pretty incredible. So that's what I'm going to miss.
In the back there? He just jumped your second question.
Yeah.
If you're a customer record
Yeah.
thing. But tell me how that relates now AI. I actually did a report about
Okay.
AI.
To be okay. Yeah. Yeah. So TBD. But here's one thing that I can say, and I'm not an expert on that, so I can't really answer that question. But AI, like everything that has come before it, has been, has engendered wonderful visions and terrible visions, right? And this is just like computers, the same thing. Everything along the way. Uh, when newspapers came along and they were all of a sudden going to be this thing called the penny press, and instead of being for elite, they were going to be for ordinary people. And the, newspaper publishers of those elite journals were like all in a tizzy because, oh my God, people are going to learn how to be criminals from this penny press. Everything that comes along engenders both. And we've talked a lot in class this semester about, what are the things you need to keep, front and center. Ethics is one of them. And, AI is not, it's a technology. What we do with it is what we do with it. And so, and I think here, College of Journalism is like, we have, looking around the room, we have like more than a handful of people who are already really steeped in understanding what this is and beginning to think about how it can apply it. So to be continued, but I think there's probably going to be uses for it, obviously.
More questions? Yes.
Sir. I know. I saw her.
Yeah. Get to the hard question now. Enough of the nice stuff.
Okay. Yeah. And I just need to say you're being modest because, yeah, Joe's like, was fixture in the sports journalism world here for 30 years and now runs Montgomery Media Company, and has agreed to be a guest speaker in my class on any occasion. So I just, um, so I think it's a really good question, and I can answer it in this way that when I was associate dean, I worked with new faculty and new adjuncts, like to organize the syllabus and what they were going to do in class. I said, well, what are you going to do in your first class? I said, well, I think we'll go through the syllabus, we'll go through the expectations. So you can deal with that later. You have to. I don't mean this in a mercenary way, but you got to set the hook in about the first 2 minutes, right? You got to do it right away, and you have to do it by making whatever that course is going to be seem applicable to them and to their lives. So, and I've done that in kind of everything that I teach. Students can say whether or not that worked for them, and may wish to, that's what I do. So I will just say I had a student. I don't know if and Sarah. There she is. Okay. So can I tell the story? Can I tell? Okay. Can I tell this story? Okay. So Ann Rosen and I had worked together at the Washington Post, and I think I recruited you to teach the race media class. We had, and I knew this was an area she had expertise, and we did have this discussion. But I knew from having known her from years ago that her father was John Herbers, who was a famous New York Times reporter in the South, Southern boy, and that she talked to me about having been gone along with her father to take the Klan rallies, and she told me this one story about how he had to go to St. Augustine to report on the. Yeah, Martin Luther King was there, right? Yeah, and it went violent, and meanwhile you guys were in the station wagon and you're playing in the pool in the hotel, whatever it is. And I think the sheriff or somebody came to him and said, "You got to get out of town," and coming for you, and so piled the kids in the car and left. And it's a breathtaking story. And I said, "You got to start with that story because that is what students they're going to really want to hear that." And I knew Sean and Ann's mother too because they lived in our neighborhood. And when I would walk my dog, Sally, she fell in love with him. I don't know why. And she would always cross the street, and I was afraid she'd knock. So I had kind of a connection to that. But that is, does that make sense? Yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
Sir. Thank you. Oh, okay. All right, great. Yeah, no, there was no internet, right? Yeah. So there were reporters all across the country, AP, UPI, the wire services, and they were literally gathering data at every precinct county, basically. And there is no national entity that tells us who won on election night. It's journalists. So that was being fed by wire to CBS or NBC headquarters. They were aggregating it by state or area of state, and then they were sort of shipping that telex or whatever to Philadelphia in the case of UNIVAC, where it was then being key punched in triplicate to look for errors, right? And it was going in on magnetic tape, and so that was good question.
Yes.
Hi. Yeah. a really good question. I think um, I think there could be a lot. I hate to say this because I know people who do polling, and I think they're really smart, do really great work. But I think it could be, we could ask other kinds of questions in these polls to understand how is it that people actually are forming their opinions about who they should vote for, and then really kind of do a deep dive. And then again, got to refer to my friend here, Tom.
Amanda Rip's work
Yeah.
is an example.
Yeah. One is Amanda Ripley wrote this seminal essay really called "Complicating the Narrative." Is we don't have to write stories that are, you know, black and white. We need to find out how to convey complexity, right? And that's one of those. So I think um, that's really kind of key.
And what she did is she went to conflict mediators
Right.
and people in other fields to learn about the questions that they asked to get underlying motivation.
Yeah.
So it wasn't
Yeah.
journalism.
And a study, Tom has been everywhere. So this was at American Press Institute, president, head, whatever, king, whatever they called that. I don't know what they called that job. But they did, um, there's a social scientist, philosopher, right, who looked at how people form their moral values, clusters of moral values, and so they did this study where they sort of found 5 of these moral values and did a survey. And I hope I'm not massacring this, and found that journalists tended to have there were 5 core values that journalists tend to hold dear, and what they found was that only 11% of Americans share those particular values, right? And the one that they share the most is like factual is
The more facts you have, the better.
more the better. But people, journalists tend to think spotlighting problems in society is the way to solve them. Not everybody thinks that's true. So I think that carrying that research forward, figuring out how to do, I don't want to bring it down to like A/B testing, but like, what kind of stories with the same facts would engender trust. That answer that question? Yeah.
A couple more. Do we have time for a couple more? Yes, there, and then we'll go over here.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying not to flunk retirement. Uh, I've already been accused of probably lining up to flunk. There are a couple. I mean, I have 2 other books that I want to do. We are.
Yeah, you're flunking retirement.
I'm flunking. Yeah. They're passion projects. Somebody said, "Can you make money writing books?" you know, my publisher told me yesterday that in the first week I sold 400 books. Great. And then when I thought about it, I thought that only repays half. I don't want to end up owing them money. So to answer your question, a couple things. Molly and Tyler are moving to Western New York. They asked if we would move with them because they're going to start their family there. So that took us about a nanosecond to say, yeah, we're going to probably do that in about a year. And I have failed work-life balance. You can tell I've really failed work-life balance. So my goal is to really get healthy, and for us, healthy. There are things that I love. I love to walk and read books on Audible at the same time. I've barely done that in the last 6 months for complicated reasons. So that's really my goal, is sort of that.
Seems like a great place to end, but we have one more question. Yeah, Katie? You get the last. Whichever one of you wants.
Greetings. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You saved me. You saved me in the middle of a semester. Oh well, right. Okay. A tag team here. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You have to work at it. You know, I mean that's the bottom line. I have reached out to former students. If a former student ever reaches out to me, I'm with them. So in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've Zoomed with a former student in Indonesia, India. I'm old. It will come different times. China, right? So I think we just, I would make it clear to students these are. On my way here, a student dropped in to see me who's trying to decide between 3 job opportunities, okay? And so I think you just have to be willing to talk to students, meet them where they are. Um, in the course of 4 years of college, students have crises. And we are in a time where there are a lot of mental health crises and things that just need, I'll say like I'm taking off my teacher hat and I'm putting on my dad. I want to talk. I think I think that's
If anybody has a question they didn't get to ask, there's booze in the next room, and you
Yeah.
can ask your question. But I have
You're
to
good.
hand it
Yeah.
over to the dean.
Hey, Raphael.
So, Ira, if you're bored in retirement, I have ideas.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm afraid of.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Ira, for a fascinating conversation. Um, Before I introduce the next speaker, I just want to point out that 1952, in 2000, we got it wrong. In 2008, nobody knew that you, the young people, were going to vote. In 2012, we said, well, they won't do it again, and they did it again. In 2016, we got it wrong, and I won't even get into 2020. So, what's the message? Go vote. Um, so, on that note, I'd like to introduce Provost Jennifer King Rice, a great friend of the college, to say some words about Ira.
Sneaking a little bit late. Good evening, everybody. It is absolutely wonderful to see this room just jam packed. Can you raise your hand if you're a student? I'd like to see hands of students. How about that? There's no greater tribute than that, Ira, right? To have your students show up and offer their thanks and gratitude. I am just absolutely delighted to be here to celebrate our longtime colleague and, for many of you, teacher, Dr. Ira Chinoy. I was asked to provide just sort of a brief overview of some of the highlights of Ira's decades-long career here at the University of Maryland. And it is my absolute pleasure to do that and to add some of my own flavor to this as well near the end. But let me just start by recognizing that he has had an immeasurable impact during his years here, and maybe more importantly, in the decades to come, through the students that he has helped prepare. Not just changing the lives of those students, but also having a really meaningful impact on our society through the work that they will do, because Ira was their professor. So Ira joined the University of Maryland in 2001. He came to us as a visiting professor, and lucky for us, he's still here over 2 decades later as an associate professor of journalism. During his time here at the University of Maryland, he's taught a wide range of really provocative courses that are preparing the next generation of journalists. Courses like researching emerging media in journalism, the use of archives as a resource for journalists, computer-assisted reporting, journalism history, and so many others. And as we all know, and as you'll hear from a few others, one of his greatest contributions, as mentioned before, was building Merrill College's data journalism program into one of the very best there is, second to none in this country. Simply switching from being a full-time journalist, and a good one at that, to a professor apparently wasn't enough for Ira. He became Merrill's very first Scripps Howard Foundation Doctoral Fellow. And he earned his PhD in Journalism Studies from Merrill in 2010. It's a little bit unusual, but leave it to Ira. In 2011, he co-founded the Future of Information Alliance to create interdisciplinary dialogue, research, and action on current and pressing information-related issues. And he went on to serve as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs from 2012 to 2014. Now, while teaching may not have been the career path he originally envisioned for himself when he set out to become a journalist, as his students who are here tonight well know, Ira was an absolutely incredible educator, and it did not go unnoticed. He won the Jinx Coleman Broussard Award for Excellence in Teaching of Media History from the Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication, not once, which would be a huge honor in and of itself, but twice, in both 2021 and 2023. In 2021, he was recognized for innovating his journalism history, structure, and roles class to make remote learning in the wake of the pandemic, during the pandemic, effective and meaningful for his students. And in 2023, he was again honored with this award for innovation in his class, Researching Emerging Media in Journalism, Past, Present, and Future. In 2021, he also received the National Award for Excellence in Teaching from the American Journalism Historians Association. So we know here in this room what an excellent educator Ira Chinoy is, but clearly others outside of these walls also recognize that. But it's important to recognize also that Ira is more than a great journalist and a great educator. He is also a great colleague and friend. I first met Ira over a decade ago when we were both serving as associate deans together. And we can go into the details of that. There were some ups and downs. Well, but since that time, I have developed extraordinary respect for and admiration of Ira. I look back at my email exchanges as I was getting ready to share some of these remarks. So my email exchanges with Ira over the years, and they included all kinds of things, from exchanges about literati and faculty reporting, and don't throw rocks at us, we all remember that stumble, to his very thoughtful and warm congratulatory messages when I became dean and then provost. Nothing but support. And as I look back at these emails and thought back about my many interactions with Ira, as I used to cut through the journalism building to get a cup of coffee on my way to the College of Education. So I bump into Ira often. A number of things stuck out for me in the way Ira works and how he interacts with people. The first is that he is a great teacher. He's a great teacher, not just in the classroom, but when you bump into him in the hallway. And even more is that he is committed to his own journey of learning. And he displays just an intense interest and curiosity in the world and the events that are evolving around us and the perspectives of others, especially his students. Secondly, Ira is a leader. Ira was a leader when we met as associate deans, but he is also a leader in many informal ways every day, often playing the role of steadying the ship and helping move things forward for the collective good, even when times are tumultuous and difficult. And I thank you for that. He does those things in very thoughtful, ethical, and deliberate ways, and that's important to point out as well. And finally, Ira, and this is maybe the most important observation, and I think you all already know this, but displays a palpable tone of generosity and kindness and patience. He's gracious and he's humble and always quick to share credit for his own successes and recognitions with others around him. It's faculty and leaders like this that make our university such a special place, not just for our students, most importantly for our students, but not just for our students, but also for the many faculty and staff who have the opportunity to work with people like Ira. We are all better. We're all better because Ira was here, and I'm grateful for that. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Samantha Cohen, a freshman journalism major, and Sarah Casuto, a senior journalism major. Both took Journalism 200, Journalism History, Roles, and Structures with Dr. Chinoy as freshmen, and both are currently in his Journalism 476 class, researching emerging media in journalism, past, present, and future. And as you might recall, these are award-winning classes. Right? So I just want to welcome Samantha and Sarah.
I just wanted to say I'm Samantha Carey. I'm also a senior.
Yes.
So mixed up with the Samanthas. No worries.
You're right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Carey. We first want to thank Dean Lorente, Alex, and Katie for allowing us to speak today about Professor Chinoy.
And my name is Sarah Castudo, and we're senior journalism majors who have had the privilege of being Professor Chinoy students during our first semester of freshman year and now our final semester.
So as a class of 2020 and starting our first ever college semester during a time of much uncertainty and changes due to COVID-19, our freshman year was like no other. Not only did this add to the stress and nerves most freshmen usually feel as they begin their college journey, but it also made me personally wary of how I would feel about journalism and pursuing a career in it. Yes, we had plenty of time to decide what we wanted to do at that time, but once Sarah and I began our semester with Professor Chinoy's Door 200 class, it completely changed every uncertain feeling I had. Door 200 is the vital foundation needed for incoming journalism students to really understand the deep history behind it and how journalists in the past, until now, pushed the boundaries of reporting, were innovators, were curious, and kept the core values of truth and transparency in an effort to build trust with their audiences. Professor Chinoy instilled these core values within us from day one, but that's not all he did as an excellent educator. He cared about us. During this semester of uncertainty, many of us fell ill with COVID-19, among other things that disrupted our time of learning. Professor Chinoy was the first person to email us and check in daily, making sure we were okay, if we needed anything, and even if the dining halls were giving us the right amount of food. Then and there, not only did I know we had a professor in our corner, but I knew I belonged at Merrill College, and being a journalist was exactly what I wanted to be. And before I hand it off to Sarah, and before I start crying, I'm forever grateful to our George 200 class for introducing the two of us as we've stayed friends ever since.
Thank you, Sam. Coming into my final semester of college, I was excited for the opportunity to take one last class with Professor Chinoy. This class covered the past, present, and future of journalism, and this curriculum has had an indelible impact on me. Journalism is a field with a rich past steeped in both legacy and evolution, with each storyteller, editor, producer, and content creator adding to the landscape. Professor Chinoy's class has given me a strong foundational understanding of who has built the industry and which technologies have amplified. But more importantly, it has given me the confidence to know that my ideas can be additive to this industry's future. It has inspired and prepared me to go into the journalism field ready to innovate and create change, while maintaining the core values we learned about in our Journalism 200 class. Honestly, I didn't know much about this course until the first day. I signed up for this course for one reason, because I wanted to have a class with Professor Chinoy again. He's the kind of professor who finds a way to make every student the best version of themselves. He makes the classroom an engaging space by forming a personal connection with each and every individual and encourages us to make those same meaningful connections with fellow students. This has created the confidence that students will need as we start work. And speaking of personal connections, as he mentioned, before our freshman year, Professor Chinoy reached out to each of us to set up a one-on-one Zoom meeting to get to know us before the semester starts. Merrill students are so lucky to have been able to learn from Professor Chinoy's amazing journalism career, as well as his innate ability to encourage people to keep striving to be better and better. Thank you, Professor Chinoy, for creating a classroom environment that facilitates strong conversation and for always believing in your students. Your support, encouragement, and passion for this industry has left a lasting impact on me and Merrill College. I would not be the person or student I am today if it was not for you. We are so lucky to have been a part of your classroom not once, but twice. I would like to thank Alec and Katie again for giving us the opportunity to speak about Professor Chinoy today and celebrate his book and retirement. He will truly be missed, but his legacy will forever remain here at Merrill. I will now be passing it over to Sean Messenden. Principal Lecturer Sean Messenden is a data editor for the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism and has been a colleague of Ira's for 15 years. He took over the teaching of the introductory data journalism course from him and today teaches digital journalism courses incorporating data analysis, computational journalism technique, data visualization, programming, web development, and web design. Thank you.
Definitely not going to be able to top that, Ira.
I
So
know.
we'll try. And before I start, I just want to say the hook'em line.
Yeah.
I still remember you sitting Adam and I down 8 or 9 years ago. Fully changed. So I was asked to say a few words about Ira's legacy as a data journalist and an investigative reporter, and the role he played in building Merrill into a place known as a national leader in data. I'm a data journalist and I teach here. Besides Ira, there are now 6 other full-time faculty here who have taught data. Rob and Derek, Daniel, and I can think of nearly 10 distinct classes we offer, and that's a lot for a small class. And each year, a sizable percentage of our graduating class go on to careers in data. That strength just does not exist without the data journalism foundation that Ira laid down when he arrived 2 decades. In 2001, when Ira joined our faculty, we had 1 visiting professor who taught 1 data. We didn't call it data journalism back then. We called it computer-assisted reporting to set it apart at a time when a lot of reporting still, you didn't definitely need a computer to do it. Ira was and is a data journalism and investigative reporting. Doing data journalism today is not exactly easy, but it was way, way harder in the 80s and 90s when Ira was helping to create this reporting discipline and bring rigorous data analysis into the newsroom. Today, there's structured data everywhere. We have sophisticated data analysis software tools that are readily available. There's a huge community of data journalists who help each other. And when we get stuck on thorny coding problems, we have Stack Overflow, Google, best friend, ChatGPT to help us. In the 80s and 90s, computer-assisted reporters were often the only one of their kind in a newsroom, a pretty lonely thing. Structured data was hard to get, and it often meant badgering government officials to turn over 9-track tape and then laboriously extract. Public records laws frequently didn't have exceptions for access to structured data. Worst of all, there was no Google, really. There was no ChatGPT. There was barely an internet to scrape. It's nothing short of a miracle that he and others like him were able to do and the work. He used these methods to produce important investigative stories of the Providence Journal and the Washington Post, winning multiple Pulitzers and helping to establish the fact that computer-assisted reporters were something every news. His work inspired me and thousands of other data journalists, and he laid a strong foundation that others have built. We still teach that computer-assisted reporting course, by the way, the one Ira developed back in 2001. We eventually renamed it Data Journalism. A bunch of us here have now taught it, and we've updated it a little bit. We use some new software tools, but Ira's model still sits at the heart of the recent Q&A on Merrill's site where Ira described his thinking behind it. The basic idea behind the course is critical thinking. How do you get the What do you make of it when you look at it? What assumptions are you making about what it means? Are you reporting out how the data is gathered and how it's supposed to be used? The tools have changed since I think the critical thinking part of it is what is at the heart. So thank you, Ira, for all you have done for journalism, for Merrill, and generations of data.
Told you all at the beginning it would be bittersweet, didn't I? So I'm going to keep this short because I stand between you and the reception and more questions and the bar. But I want to say a couple of words about Ira. They start with thank you. There is not a chance that I would be here today without your mentoring and your, and the same goes for. That's not hyperbole. It's not an exaggeration. Just, I arrived at Merrill College in 2005. Since then, Ira has been a constant source of counsel and friendship. Over the years, I've gone to Ira with questions about teaching, about the curriculum, about the campus, and about leadership. And as many of you know, Ira doesn't just offer you a quick opinion. Yeah. I don't mean that in a bad way. He'll bring you into his office, and he listens to you. He's truly interested in you. And that's a rare thing in a world where we're all in our. It was Ira who, a decade ago, when I was first the director of the master's program and he was associate dean, who would meet with me and talk about classes and curriculum and how we could make both of them better and stronger. I thought we were just talking about the master's program. But Ira was teaching me about college. He was teaching me how to care about our mission and our students in ways that I had not yet figured out. He was, in his words, tricking me into being the next associate dean. In my years as associate dean, I often remembered those conversations when I had a difficult decision to make. I learned from Ira that it was possible to think both about the needs of the person in front of you, or the people involved, and about the mission and the needs of the college. I learned that it was often possible to serve them both. It usually was. And I learned that I could hold on to our principles and still be creative in order to get a more desirable outcome. I still remember those. Thank you again, Ira, for everything you've given to the journalism, to Merrill College, and to the countless graduates who are better because you taught them. We are better because we got to share in your light and your wit. We will miss you. But you left us better than you found us, and for that, we are grateful. Now, I lied to you today. You said, are there any surprises? Here's one.
I wanted to send along my congratulations to Ira. To me, Ira is the quintessential Maryland professor in the mold of Carl Session Stepp, Lee Thornton, Dean Laurenti, and so many others. A fantastic professional, in Ira's case, a Pulitzer Prize winner and a true pioneer in what we used to. I wanted to send along my congratulations to my longtime friend and colleague, Ira Chinoy. To me, Ira is the quintessential Maryland professor in the mold of Carl Session Stepp, Lee Thornton, Dean Laurenti, and so many others. A fantastic professional, in Ira's case, a Pulitzer Prize winner and a true pioneer in what we used to call computer-assisted reporting. Passionate teacher who has helped develop hundreds and hundreds of outstanding journalists in his 24 years in the classroom in College Park. And an endlessly curious and innovative scholar and researcher. Ira and I crossed paths early in our careers, back in our Providence days, but reconnected at a fateful breakfast at an IRE conference. Ira was looking for some career advice, and after a wonderful conversation, I immediately and selfishly wanted to recruit him to Maryland. Ira, please know how much you have positively impacted not just scores of students, but colleagues like me. Congratulations on your retirement. Gene and I look forward to hosting you at University of the Pacific when it is time for your West Coast tour. Be well, my friend.
And I've been forever grateful. He is now president of the university.
Thank you, Ira. You can ask him more questions outside.